Most men live their entire lives as pawns to their own impulses. You speak when you should listen. You spend when you should leverage. You react when you should observe. You wake up tired. You make decisions that drain you. You reply to messages that disrespect you. And by nightfall, you can't even remember who you were performing for. You are intelligent. You are aware. You see through people that others can't read. And yet, your life feels like a series of accidents you keep apologizing for. You feel disorganized in a way that no productivity hack has ever solved, because the chaos isn't in your schedule, it's in your architecture. Niccolo Machiavelli understood a quiet truth about human nature. The world automatically submits to the man who has completely mastered himself. If you want to stop feeling like a victim of circumstance, you must stop living by accident. You must build the silent architecture of a sovereign life. And the same applies to the inner kingdom. The first method for estimating the intelligence of a man is to look at the impulses he has around him, the thoughts he entertains, the emotions he obeys, the habits he tolerates inside his own mind. Because here is the uncomfortable truth no one prepared you for. The modern world is engineered to keep you reactive. It profits from your impulses. It feeds on your distraction. It rewards your noise and punishes your silence. You were taught to be productive but never sovereign. You were taught to be successful but never composed. You were taught to chase but never to architect, and so your intelligence becomes your prison. Because you can see the game, but you have never been handed the blueprint to play it from a position of inner authority. You have been operating without strategic thinking, without mental discipline, without the cold clarity of detachment, and the cost has been your peace. But what if the chaos you feel is not a personal failure? What if it is the predictable outcome of a man trying to navigate a strategic world with no philosophical structure? In the next several minutes, you will be given that structure, not motivation, not hacks, a unified internal system built on Machiavellian strategy and the deepest principles of self-mastery, designed to take you from anxious, reactive pawn to calculated sovereign architect. You will learn the silent architecture that quietly governs every composed man you have ever envied. And by the end, you will not just understand inner sovereignty, you will begin to embody it. If these ideas resonate with you, hit that subscribe button for more top-tier content. Also, drop an architect in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. Look closely at the man who is always busy but never advancing. He is intelligent. He works harder than most. He has read the books, listened to the lectures, taken the notes, and yet his life keeps happening to him instead of through him. This is the reactive pawn. He is not weak. He is not unaware. He is simply unarchitected. Every input the world sends him, he answers. Every emotion that rises, he obeys. Every notification, every disrespect, every passing mood, every borrowed opinion, he treats them all as commands rather than as data. And because his inner world has no hierarchy, his outer world has no authority. You have likely lived inside this pattern without naming it. You feel a wave of frustration and you fire a message you later regret. You feel a wave of insecurity and you spend money you did not need to spend. You feel a wave of loneliness and you give your attention to people who have never earned it. You feel a wave of ambition and you start 3 projects, then abandon them when the next wave hits. The reactive pawn does not lack desire. He lacks command. His own psyche has never been organized into a chain of authority, and so every impulse acts like a small ruler in a fractured kingdom. This is the silent reason why your intelligence has not yet translated into the life you sense you are capable of. Machiavelli observed that a state cannot stand when every voice inside it acts as its own prince. The same is true of the mind. When every emotion has equal say, when every desire has equal claim, when every passing thought is allowed to direct your behavior, you do not have a self. You have a parliament of impulses, and you are merely its overworked secretary. From a strategic standpoint, this is why you feel exhausted even when you have done nothing extraordinary. You are not tired from your life. You are tired from being governed by everything except yourself. And here is the harder truth. The system around you prefers you this way. A reactive man is a predictable man. A predictable man is an exploitable man. He can be marketed to, baited into arguments, pulled into outrage, drained of his time and his money, and convinced that this constant turbulence is just what it means to be alive. You were never told that composure is a form of power. You were never told that silence is a form of wealth. You were never told that detachment is the precondition for clarity, because the moment you learn those things, you stop being useful to a world that profits from your reactivity. So before you build anything new, you must see the structure of what you have been living inside. You are not behind in life because you are not smart enough. You are behind because no one ever taught you that a man without internal architecture is just raw material for other people's plans. And the moment that recognition lands inside you, something quiet begins. The pawn starts to feel the weight of the crown he was never told was his. The first wall in the silent architecture is built around your mouth. Not because words are dangerous to others, but because they are revealing about you. Every time you speak without calculation, you hand strangers a map of your inner kingdom. You show them where your insecurities sleep. You show them what triggers your anger. You show them what you secretly want approval for. And then you wonder why people who barely know you seem to know exactly which buttons to press. They do not have unusual insight. You simply gave them the blueprint, one unguarded sentence at a time. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must learn how not to be good, by which he meant a sovereign mind must learn how not to react, how not to confess, how not to explain, how not to perform sincerity on demand. This is not about becoming cold to the people you love. It is about understanding that your words are not free. They are currency. And currency spent carelessly leaves you poor in the one resource that matters most in any social environment: leverage. The reactive pawn answers every question fully. The sovereign architect answers only the questions that serve his position. Notice how often you speak just to relieve internal pressure. You explain decisions no one asked you to justify. You defend yourself against accusations that were never formally made. You share plans before they have taken root, and then watch those plans wither under the weight of premature exposure. You vent your strategy to people who quietly use it against you. You confess your fears to acquaintances who later weaponize them in subtle ways. None of this is because you are foolish. It is because no one taught you that the mouth is the front gate of your psychological architecture, and most men leave that gate wide open from morning to night. The discipline of the mouth is not silence as suppression, it is silence as selection. You begin to ask, before you speak, 3 quiet questions. Does this sentence strengthen my position or weaken it? Does this disclosure invite respect or invite intrusion? Does this reaction serve the man I am becoming or the boy I am leaving behind? When those 3 filters operate in real time, your speech transforms. You stop over-explaining. You stop arguing with people whose opinions cannot reach you. You stop announcing what you are about to do, and you start letting your results speak with a voice no one can interrupt. And something strange begins to happen in your social environment. People lean in. They sense that there is more inside you than you are giving away, and the human mind is fascinated by what it cannot fully see. Your withheld words become a form of gravity. Your composed silences become a kind of authority. Without raising your voice, without dominating a single conversation, you start to be treated differently because the world has always responded with quiet deference to the man who clearly does not need its applause. This is the first stone in the architecture of inner sovereignty, and it is laid not by what you say, but by everything you have finally learned not to. Now move inward, past the mouth, past the surface, into the room where most men have never set foot. The architecture of the mind. The reactive pawn treats his emotions as truth. If he feels anxious, the situation must be dangerous. If he feels rejected, he must be unworthy. If he feels angry, someone must be punished. He lives as if every internal weather pattern is a divine message about reality, and so he is yanked from one extreme to another, mistaking sensation for revelation. Carl Jung theorized that what you do not make conscious will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Applied to the inner architecture, this means every emotion you refuse to examine becomes a silent ruler over your decisions. The man who has never studied his own anger will be governed by it disguised as principle. The man who has never studied his own fear will be governed by it disguised as caution. The man who has never studied his own envy will be governed by it disguised as ambition. From a strategic standpoint, an unexamined emotion is not a feeling. It is a hidden command line in the operating system of your behavior. The sovereign architect does something the reactive pawn finds almost impossible. He reframes emotion as data, not as destiny. When anxiety arrives, he does not ask, "What is wrong with me?" He asks, "What is this signal trying to show me about my exposure, my preparation, my environment?" When anger arrives, he does not ask, "Who do I attack?" He asks, "Which boundary of mine has been crossed? And what does that reveal about the structure I have allowed?" When sadness arrives, he does not collapse into it. He listens to it the way a king listens to a returning scout, respectfully, attentively, but without surrendering the throne. This is mental discipline at its highest expression, not the absence of feeling, the refusal to be governed by it. To build this architecture, you must install a small but radical pause between stimulus and response. Inside that pause lives your entire sovereignty. A message arrives that insults you. Pause. A situation unfolds that disappoints you. Pause. A craving rises that demands immediate satisfaction. Pause. In that brief silence, you are no longer the impulse. You are the observer of the impulse. And the observer is always more powerful than what it observes. This is the psychological move that transfers authority from your reactivity to your reason. It is the quiet, repeatable practice that over months rewires you from a man who is constantly hijacked by his own nervous system into a man whose internal climate is governed by deliberate choice. But mastering your reactions is useless unless you implement the next principle of positioning, because the inner architecture is only half of the structure. The other half is how you stand in the world while everyone else is being moved by it. The reactive pawn believes in hard work alone. He grinds, he hustles, he exhausts himself, proving his worth to systems that quietly use his exhaustion as fuel. The sovereign architect respects work, but he worships leverage. He understands a Machiavellian truth that most ambitious men spend decades resisting. Effort without strategy is just suffering dressed in productivity. The world does not reward the man who runs the hardest. It rewards the man who positions himself so that movement happens through him, not just from him. Look at how you currently spend your energy. You answer emails before you protect your morning. You attend meetings that consume your focus and return nothing. You take on responsibilities that belong to others because saying no feels socially expensive. You invest in relationships that drain you because walking away feels morally complicated. You chase opportunities that look impressive instead of constructing opportunities that compound. This is not a character flaw. It is the absence of strategic thinking. You were taught to be useful. You were never taught to be positioned. Machiavelli observed that a prince must study the terrain before he commits his forces. Applied to your life, this means studying the terrain of your time, your attention, your relationships, your finances, your reputation, before you commit a single ounce of your limited energy. Most men commit first and study later, and then wonder why their lives feel like a war they did not choose. The sovereign architect inverts this. He observes first. He maps the landscape. He identifies the leverage points, the few decisions, relationships, and habits that quietly determine the shape of everything else. And he concentrates his force there, while remaining almost indifferent to everything that does not move the structure. Strategic detachment is the inner muscle that makes this possible. It is the capacity to care deeply about outcomes while remaining unmoved by noise. You stop measuring your day by how much you reacted to. You start measuring it by how few unnecessary things you engaged with. You stop being proud of being busy. You start being proud of being precise. You learn to allocate your attention the way a careful general allocates troops, knowing that attention spent in the wrong terrain is not just wasted. It is a quiet betrayal of the man you are trying to become. This is self-mastery expressed as logistics, inner sovereignty expressed as calendar, as conversation, as financial decision, as silence held at the exact moment others would have spoken. And this brings us to the exact mechanism that separates the strategist from the reactionary. The reactionary believes life is happening at him. The strategist understands that life is a slow negotiation between his architecture and the world's pressure, and that whoever has the more coherent structure quietly sets the terms. There comes a point in every awakening man's life when he must decide which archetype will govern his future. He can remain the reactive pawn, intelligent but ungoverned, capable but uncomposed, full of potential that never crystallizes because there is no internal throne for it to organize around. Or he can step, deliberately and without apology, into the archetype of the sovereign architect, the strategist, the inner king, not a tyrant over others, a composed authority over himself. This is where shadow integration becomes essential. You were likely raised to feel guilty about wanting power, guilty about wanting control, guilty about wanting to be the one who decides. You were trained to dilute your ambition with constant apology, to soften your authority so others would feel comfortable, to disown the part of you that quietly wanted to rule your own life with absolute clarity. That disowned part did not disappear. It went into the shadow, and from the shadow it has been sabotaging you, through procrastination, through self-doubt, through a strange resistance to your own discipline. Carl Jung theorized that what you reject inside yourself will return in distorted forms until you finally integrate it. The strategist archetype is one of those rejected parts in most modern men, and reclaiming it is not a moral failure. It is a psychological necessity. To integrate the sovereign architect, you stop pretending you do not want order. You stop pretending you do not want command of your finances, your habits, your emotions, your communication. You stop performing helplessness as humility. You acknowledge, privately and honestly, that you were built for structure, that your nervous system longs for a coherent life, that your intelligence was never meant to be wasted on putting out fires you did not start. And then you begin to live as if that recognition is non-negotiable. You design your mornings as a king designs his court. You guard your attention as a king guards his treasury. You select your relationships as a king selects his advisors by their effect on the stability of the kingdom, not by the volume of their demands. Notice the subtle but enormous shift. You are no longer trying to dominate other people. You are no longer trying to win at someone else's game. You are quietly withdrawing from the chaos as a primary identity and stepping into philosophical sovereignty as your default state. Your decisions begin to share a single internal signature. Your finances reflect your discipline. Your habits reflect your detachment. Your speech reflects your strategy. Your silences reflect your composure. There is finally a unified system behind the man, and people feel it before they can explain it. They do not always like it. They are not supposed to. The sovereign architect is not built for universal approval. He is built for unshakable alignment. Before we move to the final principle of absolute leverage, understand this. The reason most men never reach this state is not lack of capacity, it is lack of permission. They are waiting for someone to tell them it is acceptable to take their own life seriously. Consider this your formal permission. You are allowed to want sovereignty. You are allowed to want command. You are allowed to build the silent architecture, even if those around you prefer the chaos they have grown comfortable with. The final principle of the architecture is the most misunderstood because it looks, from the outside, like doing nothing. Silent leverage, the art of letting positioning, patience and composure do the work that frantic effort can never accomplish. The reactive pawn cannot grasp this. He thinks power is loud. He thinks authority is performance. He thinks importance is announced. The sovereign architect knows better. The deepest forms of influence are almost invisible to those who have not been trained to see them. Machiavellian strategy at its highest level is not about scheming against others. It is about arranging your life so that you no longer have to. When your finances are quietly structured, you do not have to argue about money. When your habits are quietly disciplined, you do not have to negotiate with your own willpower. When your emotions are quietly observed, you do not have to apologize for explosions you did not need to have. When your communication is quietly precise, you do not have to repair relationships that should never have been damaged. This is silent leverage, the compounding return on a man who has built his architecture so carefully that most of his battles are won before they ever begin. To live this way, you must accept a difficult exchange. You give up the dopamine of being seen as impressive in the short term, in return for the deep stability of being respected in the long term. You give up the rush of reacting in real time, in return for the authority of responding on your own schedule. You give up the comfort of blending into the reactive masses, in return for the quiet weight of standing slightly apart from them. This is the price of inner sovereignty, and most men cannot pay it because they have never been shown what they are buying. You are buying a life that does not require constant defense. You are buying a mind that does not have to be reconvinced every morning that it is allowed to be calm. In every environment you enter, the silent architect operates by a few unspoken laws. He arrives without urgency. He speaks without need. He listens without performance. He withdraws without explanation. He commits without announcement. He observes the room before he enters the conversation. He notices who is performing and who is actually positioning. He does not interrupt when others reveal themselves. He stores what he sees, not as ammunition, but as terrain data for future decisions. He treats his own life as a long campaign, not a series of emotional skirmishes. And because his internal structure is coherent, the external world begins to organize itself around him, not the other way around. This is what Machiavelli pointed at when he wrote about the prince who is feared in the right measure and respected without effort. Translated into the language of self-mastery, it means this: when a man no longer fears his own mind, the world stops being able to disturb it. When a man no longer needs to prove his worth, the world quietly begins to assume it. When a man no longer reacts to every provocation, the world stops bothering to provoke him. Silent leverage is not the absence of action. It is the presence of such complete internal architecture that action becomes surgical, rare, and devastatingly effective. And so the structure stands: the discipline of the mouth, the architecture of the mind, the strategy of the move, the sovereign archetype, the silent leverage. 5 quiet walls around the inner kingdom, built by the man who finally decided he was done living by accident. You came into this conversation as an intelligent man who felt strangely behind in his own life. You leave it with something most men never receive: a unified, philosophical, strategic framework for organizing yourself from the inside out. You will not become this overnight. No one does. But from this moment forward, you have something you did not have before. You have the blueprint. The reactive pawn lived without one. The sovereign architect refuses to. Every morning you wake up, you now have a choice that the unaware do not even know exists. You can hand the day to your impulses, or you can hand it to your architecture. One will tire you, the other will quietly transform you. Detachment, strategic thinking, mental discipline, inner sovereignty, self-mastery. These are no longer abstract words. They are the materials you have just been given to build with. So here is your final instruction. Do not perform this. Do not announce it. Do not explain to anyone what you are doing. Begin quietly today. Choose one wall and start building. Discipline your mouth for one full day. Pause before one impulse. Position one decision strategically instead of emotionally. Reclaim one archetype you were told to apologize for. Practice one act of silent leverage where you would normally have reacted, and then do it again tomorrow and the day after. The silent architecture is not raised in a single act of inspiration. It is raised in the unwitnessed repetitions of a man who has finally decided that his own life is worth governing with care. If this reached something in you that has been waiting to be named, type the word sovereign in the comments, not as a slogan, as a quiet declaration to yourself that the reactive pawn is being retired and the architect is taking the throne. And if you are ready to keep building this inner kingdom, subscribe and stay close. This is one of the few places where strategy, philosophy, and deep psychology are treated as the serious instruments of self-mastery they were always meant to be. We do not deal in motivation here. We deal in architecture. We deal in the rarely taught wisdom that quietly separates the composed few from the reactive many. And whatever you do, don't stop now. The on-screen video matters more than you think. It continues exactly where this one ends, with the next layer of the architecture, the principle that turns everything you just learned into a self-reinforcing system of inner sovereignty. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. I'll see you there. See what others miss, know what others fear, become who others can't.